There are rare moments in each of our lives where we experience special events. Events that open our eyes to undeniable truths. Now, events such as these are precious, and I believe that we should cherish them within our own hearts. But because they're so precious, I believe that we should also share them with others as well. Madam Toastmaster, fellow babblers and distinguished guests, I recently experienced such an event. And as a result, I feel compelled to share it with you today. But before I do, I need to first tell you about a dear friend of mine whose name is Mark. Mark is the son of the pastor of our church. He's 32 years old, and I've known him ever since he was a little baby. He and his parents lived across the street from us when I was a teenager, and he was at our house regularly growing up. My mother would often keep an eye on him for his parents. She did this as a favor, because Mark was quite a handful. And also, you see, because Mark was born mentally retarded. Now, taking care of a rambunctious kid is one thing, but Mark was especially difficult to control. Don't get me wrong, it's not that he was a troublemaker, it's just that Mark had this uncontrollable exuberance for life. Let me give you an example. My parents had a pool in their backyard. Well, one day my dad invited Mark and his dad over to swim. Mark absolutely loved it. From that day forward, Mark would regularly escape from his house, racing across the street to ours, throwing his clothes off along the way until he finally burst through our front door completely naked, announcing to my family, "I go swimming!" And let me tell you, that's enough to pull you away from watching a rerun of The Gong Show. We would then take Mark by the hand, get him dressed, and then take him back across the street to his mom and dad. Now, he was always welcome to swim in our pool, provided that his parents approved and accompanied him. But the problem was that Mark wanted to swim all of the time. Thus, an example of that exuberance that I mentioned earlier. Well, time marched on. I eventually grew up, married, and I had a child of my own, my daughter Amanda, who happens to be 8 years younger than Mark. Well, Mark also grew up too, but although Mark grew physically, he still retained the young mind of a child. As a result, Mark felt much more comfortable around the little kids in the church rather than with the adults who were his own age. He was a gentle giant, though, and the kids loved him. Always happy and smiling, he still exhibited that same exuberance for life. An exuberance that it seemed that me and my generation had lost years earlier. Well, Amanda grew up too, and my daughter became a beautiful young woman. And Mark took note of this, and he developed a crush on my daughter. He would often come up to Amanda and ask her if she wanted to be his girlfriend. She would gently decline it, though, and explain that she'd much rather just remain his friend. Mark was a persistent suitor, though. And still to this day, he asks her that question. Now, recently, we were at the funeral home after the passing of my grandmother. Many friends were present, including Mark. Amanda was there too, and she was preoccupied waiting for her boyfriend to arrive. Mark heard that Amanda had a boyfriend. When he did, he systematically went through that funeral home looking for my daughter. When he found her, he grinned and pointing, he said, "You're in trouble with me." "Now, why is that, Mark?" "'Cause you have a boyfriend." "Now, Mark, why would I be in trouble with you? You and I were good friends." Mark just grinned and walked away. But I could tell that my friend was troubled. He was thinking hard about something, and eventually he came over to me and putting his arm around my shoulders, he said he wanted to talk. Now, I thought that this was unusual behavior from Mark, but I obliged him because I could tell that he was serious. "Ronnie, I think that me and Amanda could live happily ever after. You do? Yeah. Happily ever after, just like in the movies, right? Yeah, like in the movies. What's your favorite movie, Mark? Hoping to divert him from the boyfriend and girlfriend subject. Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast, the one with the singing candles and clocks, right? Yeah. Why is that your favorite movie, Mark? At this, Mark grew very serious. Because at first she was scared of him, but then she saw that he was really nice, and she loved him. My heart leapt up into my throat, and I could barely keep my composure. It's a good story, huh? But I was speechless. Mark was paralleling the characters in the story to him and Amanda. In this story, when Belle comes to the castle, she's horrified of the beast. But then something miraculous occurs. She ends up looking beyond the beast's outward appearance and touching his heart. In the end, because of the true love of Belle, the beast is transformed into a handsome prince. Yeah, Mark. It's a really, really good story. Satisfied, Mark walked away. That incident played over and over and over again in my mind. It was all that I could think about. I told it to my wife and I told it to my parents. It profoundly affected me. And although I could see the parallel between the characters in the story and Mark and Amanda, I felt like there was something else that I was supposed to see, like there was something else that I was supposed to learn. And then it hit me. Isn't this just like us, God? Our Creator, so beautiful and loving, and we are all beasts capable of terrible evil. But we're also beings capable of great love. We're virtually princes and princesses, trapped by our own natures. But if we allow God to touch our hearts, to come into our own private castles, then we too can be transformed. I then thought about Mark. And although Mark saw himself as the beast in the story, I realized ironically that Mark was really more like Belle. Carefree and loving, this gentleman always looked beyond the outward appearance, seeing only the beauty within. Loving others without judgment, my old friend unknowingly was teaching me a lesson. Barbara DeAngelo says that love is a force more formidable than any other. It is invisible, it cannot be seen or measured, but it is powerful enough to transform you in a moment and give you more joy than any material possession ever could. One day, I truly believe that Mark will be transformed into the handsome prince that exists within his own heart. And if we can look upon others through the eyes of an innocent child, like Mark does, seeing only that beauty within, then maybe, just maybe, that same miracle can happen for us too. Madam Toastmaster,